product teams that help develop all these different data analytic products and services that we use, and then also working directly with clients in our commercial teams to really try to find the best solutions to some key questions and use cases such as the one today, about launching a title, how do we benchmark that, etc. So just a bit about myself as well. I've just been in the industry over 10 years as well. Everything from biz dev to operations, producer of games like NBA 2K, and I've even started my own studio developing titles. So I just wanted to quickly highlight as well the three different types of data that we will be focusing on leveraging today as well, and which are kind of the three pillars as well of Newzoo core foundation products. The first is report data, which is trends, market sizing, forecast data. This is probably what we're best known for. This really is powerful, I think, for being able to size what is previously unsizable. So you were, I believe, the first to size the game market as a whole, and we've done much, much more than that to try to forecast, look ahead, what are the trends, what's coming up in the games market that we need to understand. The second pillar is our consumer insights. This is survey-based data, so this is really looking at player demographics, psychographics, answering everything from who, what, when, where, why, etc. These really tough to ask questions. This survey type of data is really powerful in answering those questions and figuring out more about your players or potential players. And then the last piece is what we call Newzoo Expert. This is our tracking data. So this is what I think many companies already have for their own data, of course. This is telemetry data, looking at who's playing, how long they're playing, those kind of engagement level data. So with this, we have everything from player engagement to what they're paying, what they're buying, what they're viewing, even social media engagement across thousands and thousands of games. So I think what's really cool is having all these different types of data together. We can go really deep into some of the key questions that we see. Again, such as one of the topics today, which is concept to launch. All these key phases, what kind of data do we need and how do those answer our questions? So how we're going to structure today's talk is three key phases and the core questions that we need to answer in each one of these phases. So from our experience, we hear a lot of these same questions at each stage. The first one being, of course, greenlighting. So figuring out what game do we want to build, how do we forecast and budget this, who's my potential audience, and even how do we optimize our design to maximize our potential in the market. The second phase is our go-to-market phase. Some of the key questions here could be, what markets or platforms do we want to focus on? Who is my target audience? So now zooming further and saying, what are the different segments that we should focus on? How do we reach these target audiences? And then how do we benchmark and forecast our launch? And then the final phase here, we'll have post-launch. So for many games, it's really important to understand after launching, how do we really keep growing and maintain our audience? And also answering some of those questions like, how do we actually benchmark our game? Who's my competition? Essentially, how do I stay ahead or get ahead? So in the first place, green light. For this example, I created a hypothetical game, which as you can see, there's fantastic box art name, A Long Again Adventure. But I wanted to frame this whole discussion around a hypothetical game that can really help us understand how to leverage some of these techniques and data to answer these key questions. For this example, we're going to have we know that we want to build a PC console game. Let's say it is an action adventure genre, and the theme is going to be post-apocalyptic. So some of the key things that we've already answered, we're going to skip ahead and not look into all the trends right now, but just focus on this part for now. So one of the classic ways of just forecasting, let's say we know, again, with the action adventure title, we could take some key data points that we know. So maybe we could find this data somewhere externally, some public available data or resources like what you can see here. This is pulling from our platform expert, Newzoo Expert I mentioned. But this is just a couple key titles in this space. So action adventure titles from summer 2021 on the console and Steam. Okay, what is their lifetime players, as in total players to date that have ever played the game, versus what is their average monthly active users if we're looking at a game as a service. And then we can start seeing, although they're AA and AAA titles, we can see some performance scenarios here. kind of a low, medium, high gradient. So if we wanted to, we could start using this as anchor for forecasting, saying, okay, if we perform on the lower end, maybe we'll be about 500,000 players total, and we can go all the way up to 7 million in the top range there. But we can go even deeper or try different techniques as well, which can help us really maybe zoom in on better entry point. The first way is using what we have at Newzoo is our taxonomy. So I want to just quickly touch on what's important, I think, for a lot of data now. There's so much data in the industry as a whole, but adding intelligence layers has been a key focus for us, and I think it would be really important to make data even easier to use, more insightful, more actionable as a whole. And so with this Newzoo's games taxonomy that we created, we've really gone for a couple years now to tagging thousands and thousands of games across different platforms, figuring out what genre they are, what subgenre, what art style, theme, even game mechanics that they have. And with all this tagged out, this allows us to filter and zoom in on only the types of games or variables that are most interesting to us. So one technique we can start doing with that is saying, hey, maybe before we even forecast, we want to start optimizing. What kind of game we want to build? Well, how do we optimize to find the right one to succeed in the market potential? And one thing that we can do is, for example, taking this is the example of different variables that are game mechanics or important variables for a game in action adventure, perhaps. We can say, do they have yes or no? Do they have this variable? And for all the games that do, what is the different range of performances? So I'm using a box plot here, which essentially just breaks down a group of data points into bottom 25%, medium 50%, top 75%, and max. So just a couple ranges here to see what is the different performance there for these types of games. And we can see for action adventure games, open world building for some reason don't seem to make a big impact for the games available at least. And past, again, this is always looking at past performance, we can't predict. But we can see some games that have crafting and online multiplayer for some reason seem to perform a lot better. Now, of course, we need to do qualitative analysis to see why, or if it fits our game in general, or we have the capacity to do something like online multiplayer. But this can show us at least that we can see that certain games are, or certain elements are high impact, some seem to be lower impact for the specific type of game that we're building. So we might adopt crafting and online multiplayer as another key element or elements that we want to add in to our game before we build it. Now let's say we optimize the design, we're happy with the different elements involved. Now we can also do another type of forecasting method, which is using the taxonomy, so taxonomy-based forecasting. And again, like I mentioned, we've identified some of the key elements from action, adventure, crafting, themes like sci-fi or post-apocalyptic, and things like online multiplayer. With this, again, tagging and taxonomy across thousands of games, then we can filter down to the types of games that match our criteria that we think would be our direct competitors, or at least, direct reference point started forecasting. And we can see games all the way from 30 million players down to way down to the bottom at 10K play. So 15 different titles that match within thousands of games. And then again, we can start running something similar to before, but we can look at different performance scenarios. Looking at the low or bottom 25% of games, reach about 200,000 players. This is the mid, which is about 1.7 million. And then we can look at the top 25%, all the way up to 9.5 million. So, of course, we can slice and dice this in different ways. You can track different performance scenarios by changing different elements of the game. But this could start giving us an anchor point or benchmarking to start game forecasting, which we'll probably want to do next in a much more detailed way, month over month, and adding in other variables such as marketing, etc. But to switch gears, I'm going to look at, you can see on the top right, we're switching to another product, the consumer insights that I'm pulling this data from. But this is a really cool way to answer, I think, some of the questions around who's my potential audience. So similar to what we did with the taxonomy, by identifying the key elements for a game, we can also do that with what we are going to call from now on Armageddon adventure prospects. So what we did to zoom in on this, we could say, hey, I only want to look at players that played adventure games in the last 6 months, find something like sci-fi theme appealing, and then they play online multiplayer games in general. And with this segment of players, then we can zoom in and say, what are the differences in maybe first demographics? So I have three columns here. One is the average player, so total players, what does the average player look like, versus action adventure players, so another subcategory that might be interesting to us. And then the last one there is the Armageddon prospects. You can see across the board, we tend to get from a very balanced kind of 50-50 split in terms of gender, or kind of an even split across age groups on these different rows here, to more balanced education income. Further right we go here, zooming further and further, we see that, for example, Armageddon and prospect players skew much more male, skew much younger. You see that they tend to have a higher education, and even a higher annual income. And of course, this is only one key variable with demographics, but we can start to understand that our prospects tend to skew male, younger, educated, etc. And this gives us an idea of who our potential audience can start to be. But we can go one step further, and I think this is really cool for helping us design, figuring out, are we optimized? Are we finding the best variables and elements to improve on our game's potential performance? And one way we do that, I'm looking just at the console players here, but we could do that by looking at first motivations. So here we have the percentage of Armageddon adventure prospect players versus all other players, the average player. And we can see what percentage of them are motivated by these different elements. But we can also see with green versus blue. This is green is over-indexing compared to the average player, and blue or purple here is under-indexing. So we can see, of course, a lot of players want to relax, no matter the category, but we can see certain elements like exploring a story, immersion, way over-indexed in terms of the prospect players that we're looking at, while something like filling time really under-indexed compared to the average player. So again, I think this makes sense. We're looking at adventure players that tend to like these types of elements. Also important to note, they don't want to just build time up. That's not the most important variable here. But there's also lower ranking, but again, high index is the creativity and team objectives, which I think is pretty neat as well. Think about for elements that we can potentially add to the game. Another way to look at that is appealing features. So again, this is questions asked, what features are appealing to these types of players? And if we slice it down to our group of players we're interested in, we can see a lot of the similarities. Exploration is similar, narrative is like story again, but we have multiplayer social ranking high, since we're looking at players that like online multiplayer games. But we can even see things that are under indexing that might be really good decisions of what to edit out or to put less focus on, such as puzzles, which I think are pretty common in these types of games, but maybe this is a reason to think twice about how much effort we want to put into that, or do we want to include puzzles, for example. So again, this is just another way to slice it and give us a better idea of what our players look like, which will, I guess, help us design, and then maybe as well down the road when we get to the go-to-market, how do we market, which kind of players do we market to? So, I mean, there's tons more to do in this phase, of course. Like I mentioned, you go much deeper into the forecasting and analysis part. I think another cool thing that you can focus on, focus group testing or concept testing. And this is something new that we've actually built here at Newzoo, is we're just starting to build out more specialized surveys and focused products such as concept testing, which can really help you zoom in and answer these key questions of who's your audience, how's your game perceived by them, where can you optimize, etc. So I thought that was kind of interesting that we're trying to dive deeper into these specific topics, and we'd love to hear more if anyone else has any thoughts or questions about this as well. Okay, jumping to the second phase here is the go-to market now. So let's say we have our game ready, we know what we're building, or we're already on the way. Obviously, the earlier you answer these questions, usually the better. So not ideal to wait actually to a final go-to-market state to answer a lot of these, but these are things I think that are pretty crucial to understand before you're really ready to go to market. And some of those questions again would be, what markets or platforms do we want to focus on? Who is my target audience, or the groups of audiences that I need to focus on? How do we reach them, and how do we benchmark our launch? So the first question there was how and where to launch. And what's kind of cool with our data as well, with our tracking data, we can actually aggregate with our taxonomy into larger groups of things like genres. We can see the total action of entry in the for example, and on a market level or country level, how does it break down? And we can see for regions, we can see that 47% of action metro players are in North America, 28% Western Europe, and 25% the rest of the world. So already you can see that
We'll just try and get this sorted out. Too long. Are you still getting it?
Yeah.
You are.
Yeah. That's gone now.
Huh?
It's gone now.
It's gone. Well, yeah, because I paused it.
Oh, right. No, as in like it was paused on the screen, but it's gone. It's back now. Where is it? I think it's a collective thing. All the power's gone out everywhere, I think. Yeah. Chris, it's everywhere.
Yes. Yeah. What's your name?
Gina. Okay.
It's even more better. Like, oh wow, thank you for coming for that. Yeah, no, it's a lot better about Sunday, so I make it Tuesday.
Oh, right, yeah, but that means that the stream score dropped out, is it?
No, because we seem to have power this
Yeah, I'll send it out in just certain parts.
So it was like, they were like, yeah. Luckily they said, I showed you the
So actually how to get the how many videos per day. This is just a recorded video.
Marketing first retention. We can go further down. If we break down the 75% to which platforms are they playing on, you can see that for action adventure games, 61% of them are playing on PlayStation alone, 29% on Xbox, and then 11% on Steam. So obviously consoles are pretty limited, but especially PlayStation. You can see that these types of games really resonate with audiences, or at least there's some really important big franchises here that are really popular and making this genre as a whole popular. So if we have to pick and we have to focus our marketing resources, these could be the platforms and areas that we want to focus on first. Now, zooming in onto reaching your audience. So if we are saying we're focused on Western Europe, North America, and we notice that we focus on console maybe more, now we can zoom in and say, how do we reach this potential audience? And I think one interesting aspect is looking at entertainment. How are these players engaging across the board? We can see here the breakdown of what percentage of these, again, AA prospects that we're looking at, what percentage of them spend different amounts of time in each one of these different fields of entertainment. And no surprise, at the very bottom here, we have playing games. We have over 60% here playing 10 plus hours per week of video games. But we have an interesting spread here across all these different channels, from shopping online to listening to music. Some of the most interesting ones, I think, from a marketing angle, of course, are watching shows, series, film, videos, especially videos. And if we zoom in on there, I think what's interesting is that we can start breaking down what different channels these prospects are using. So again, looking at our prospects, what live streaming viewership platforms they use per country. And we can see here we have Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook, YouTube being the most popular here. And this is also, as you can see, broken down per country. I have UK, US, France, and Germany. We can also see what's the difference in their social network use per country as well. There's not as much variation here per country. You would get a lot more variation, of course, if you're looking at very vastly different countries, but still quite interesting to know where they use the most, where they spend the most time in terms of social networks or streaming, for example. So again, this might be the very beginning to start looking into where can we target them, what are the right platforms to target these types of users. We flip back over to some of our tracking data. We can zoom in even further into the streaming part. So let's say really popular these days is building up a streamer or influencer partner strategy as a whole. One step to do that would be that we could start looking at our competitors. So other action adventure type titles out there. Which ones are the most popular? Which channels are the most hours being watched of their games? And that can start figuring out where we want to target for some kind of streamer partnership as well. And we can see, for example, Red Dead, Facebook, and Twitch by far. And again, this is live streaming now, so YouTube's going to be much lower. But Facebook, Twitch, and then Twitch on both CPs and stuff. So very different scale for each one of these games, so good to know where to reach them. Next, we can look at, for example, what about who do we partner with? If we look at Red Dead, for example, what are the top channels here? What's interesting is in Twitch, we can actually see which language these channels are streaming in, and then that can start helping us figure out a local approach to each one of our marketing strategies. And you can see, for example, for some reason, Red Dead, the top 5 channels are all in German. So if we want to reach the German market, this might be a good start. Zooming in on Sea of Thieves, we see the flip. We see all the top channels are in English, especially very top speed here. And then Breath of the Wild, we actually see a pretty interesting mix of languages, though very top heavy with German and French here, the top 2 channels. So again, figuring out which different channels to focus on, which languages or countries they can reach, can help us start figuring out how to maximize our partnership strategy. So one other thing that's interesting, I think, is benchmarking your launch. So again, we could have done this earlier on, figuring out kind of a month-over-month launch forecast. But I think it's also really interesting to know, especially as we're talking about marketing, how important the correlation and influence of different types of channels. So we're looking at 3 different things here: Ghost of Tsushima, where we're looking at total hours watched versus viewership versus Reddit engagement here in the dotted line, and then we have MAU here in the green. Now the scale is the most important here. There's no scale shown here, but I think it's really the pattern that's interesting for this game, and especially for games that have a lot of beta pre-launch type of activity as well. So for this one, we can see M0, which is the launch date, versus M1 or month 1, month 2, month 3, etc., and then even -1, -2. So before launch, what kind of activity was going on in terms of social media? You can see an uptake 2 months before launch here, Reddit. And then, of course, viewership in Reddit spiking very high in the launch month. And you can even see some interesting spikes afterwards from Reddit beyond that. So quite interesting to understand how to benchmark against these, maybe researching more about how they launched their campaign, what kind of things they did to build this buzz. But then also you can benchmark the numbers themselves. So how much viewership translated into how many new players, for example. So interesting start to this analysis. And I think you can start using these, for example, the averaged out action adventure. What's their launch month look like in terms of viewership hours, Reddit engagement, etc. This can start setting up different scenarios for us to see how we're doing compared to our previous competition. So, of course, again, so much more you could go into with this type of analysis. I really think that at this stage you can go into a lot with the marketing strategy as a whole, figuring out more segments for your target audience that you can focus on in different ways. There's a lot you can do in terms of figuring out where to spend, in terms of marketing, how to engage in social media, et cetera, et cetera. So much more to do, but for another time. The last phase here is the post-launch. So this one is quite interesting, especially for any game that is run as a live service, which of course is one of the most important new additions in the last decade or so to gaming. But how do we actually, after launch, whether successful or not, how do we keep growing? How do we retain our audience over time? Some of the other key questions are, who's my competition? How do we benchmark your game and make sure that we're doing the right things to keep it afloat? So this section, because we haven't launched Armageddon Adventure, it's going to be a bit more hypothetical. So a lot of this data is coming from other titles or slightly adjusted around other titles to show you a realistic scenario, but again, hypothetical at this point. So one of the first steps is how do I benchmark, looking at competitors, what kind of analysis can we do? And I'm pulling out some key stats here. This is US only, but this is looking at everything from different revenue streams, so different revenue KPI, I should say, including recurring revenue, meaning any of that microtransactions, et cetera, type of money that we make beyond the premium sales. Also, the second one there is average revenue per user, or ARPU, conversion rate, which is what is the percentage of players that are actually spending money inside of the game. And then the second section here, we have more engagement and retention metrics. So what is the average time that a player is playing per day versus how many days do they play per month versus monthly churn, 48%. The last one there is our new players. So for example, day one, so the first day after their initial launch of the game, 40% of them came back, 16%, 7 days after, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully a lot of you have seen these metrics or these types of metrics before. These are kind of the health of our game across different variables and saying how well are we doing. And of course, for most companies, it's engagement first. If we can keep our play time or retention, all these numbers high enough, then we have a chance to start monetizing the player. But all these numbers by themselves are great, they're interesting, but how do we actually benchmark One of the first steps we could do, again, is looking at that genre benchmark. What is the genre average as a whole? So I've taken here the action-adventure genre across all the different games. What is their average performance? And you can start seeing where we're higher and lower in competition. Recurring revenue-wise, the average game is making double our recurring revenue per month, but we actually have a higher ARPU, and they tend to have a higher conversion rate. So we're doing something better to monetize the players that we do have monetizing, but we're converting less to monetize. You can also do the same thing across the engagement. You can see they have more average play time on average, but we have more days played per month, retention rates, etc. We can look at that. Another thing we can do, if being ambitious, is look at some of the top titles. This is one of the top action-adventure games out there, making way more money recurring revenue, as you can see. But it's really interesting to know where the differences lie in terms of engagement, all the way to monetization here. And I think what's important to take away from this is we can start setting up benchmarks for ourselves. Where can we improve first? Where do we want to focus? Again, I would argue, of course, that engagement comes first, so we should focus on the bottom end of this. We're saying, how do we get our playtime up? Or maybe it looks like our later retention, day 14, 28, beyond that, seems to be lower than the competition. I mean, players are going to churn over time. They're not engaging long term. How do we bump that up? And then also, of course, KPIs are related to monetization as well. We need to figure out ways to get a recurring revenue up, but a lot of that could be from the low conversion rates that we have. How do we get our conversion rates up? So with these benchmarks, we can start doing more qualitative work to say what to build next, what events we can do, what else can we learn. Another cool analysis that I really enjoy is what we call cross-play or overlap analysis. So again, we're assuming in the previous slide that the action-adventure games are our direct competition. And they are for a lot of reasons, I'm sure. But what's also really interesting to note is that if you can actually map out what other games your players are playing, then you can start understanding who is the competition in terms of where else your players are playing and spending their time. So as we can see here, this again is a different game, slightly different themes and art styles, etc. But we find with this example here, we have a percentage of our players at the bottom, so from 0 to 60%. What percentage of our players are playing other games? We have 45%, for example, of our players also playing Minecraft in the same month. And we have, for example, on the other side, is percentage of the other games played. So we have 13% of the Escapist 2 players that are also playing Armageddon Adventure at this time. And I think what's interesting is a lot of times you'll find unique clusters within here. So where are you kind of over-indexing, or where is there a lot of your players playing, or other games players that are playing your game? And we can see here there's a cluster of indie multiplayer-focused games like Escapist 2, Game Beast, Human Fall Flat, etc. And on the other end, we see quite often this is the case. This is going to be the top game. It's going to be the top AAA games or the most popular games in general. But what's quite interesting is when certain games over-index compared to other ones. So Minecraft and Fortnite are especially high here. And so a little bit of the patterns I think we can see is that multiplayer-focused games, for this example, cartoon art style, those kind of games tend to resonate more, it seems. But at the same time, there's a really big variety of themes in gameplay. So again, we can't just say it's action-adventure games if this is the case. There's some actual core, just top games in general that we need to look out for. Now, one of the things as we noticed was our retention rates weren't super high. They weren't too bad, but let's say we're trying to get to the next level. We're trying to be one of the top players out there, just like we saw with Fortnite, etc. One thing we do is a specialized survey, really looking into, for example, a specific topic, like lapsed or churned players from our game. Why did they churn, for example? And this is a couple other theoretical games here compared to ours, and just to benchmark and say, where do we differ from our competition? And we can see in the last one here, we have new, more exciting games, 20% of them listed as a reason, didn't like recent updates, 2 over-indexed items here compared to the other games. Why are these 2 questions here? What can we learn? What's going on here? I think it's an important question. The second group here is the share of lapsed players intending to start playing again. We actually have a pretty high number, so almost over 50% of our players are somewhat or extremely likely to play again. So that's an important number, I think, to understand, or the group to understand and figure out how do we bring them back potentially. So yeah, I think that's an important takeaway here. We can go a step deeper though. To answer those specific questions, we might want to ask, where did they go? So there's more exciting games out there. And again, this is a hypothetical game that I pulled this data from. But it's quite interesting that we see a unique grouping of games at the top. Forza, which is nothing like action adventure. Halo, it's a shooter. But this is quite common as well, that a lot of times your players are going to play very diverse group of games, not just your genre. And if a new game comes out that hits their interest, they can also churn to that game. So using this type of data, this churn to data is similar to overlap, but we can see where your players play after playing your game. This might be a really cool starting point to start setting up retargeting campaigns for marketing to figure out how to bring those players back. It's always cheaper to bring back new, old players compared to buying new players. But especially if you know how to target them, what games they're playing out, where they located, that can really help us focus in on the marketing efforts. Another area that was mentioned was that our updates weren't exciting, right? One of the reasons they laughed was it seems like not a lot of good content coming out. So one thing we can start doing is live ops analysis and start figuring out what content is really going to drive engagement, bring players back or keep them in. And took two examples here. Again, MAU is the y-axis, though there is no scale here. I don't think that's the most important variable. But just looking at how specific DLC, for example, or season updates can impact your players, the number of players engaged, or other key metrics like their play time. What is cool is that we are tracking these kind of things very heavily right now, looking deeper into every little variable possible, graphing on top of these charts to understand really quickly where, not just when did it go up or down in terms of the reasons why. And so you can see here, two big DLC launches here had over 20% increase in MAU. And we also had, over 20% on each one of these. And then here at the second one, this is Sea of Thieves. We can see that it's very different. Although, of course, the scale is much different, but we can see there's over 80% increase in MAU right when the season 3 and a new DLC launched. But in September 21, we had actually a negative impact, or not really an impact from the new season launching in that time period. So, of course, again, we might want to do a lot more qualitative here. That's where it really comes down to what they do in these different DLCs or seasons that could be beneficial or not, what was successful, what wasn't. We have to dive into that. It's also interesting just to know the cadence, how much average MAU growth we have per title here, to also do some benchmarking. So why is GTA performing so well? What's their cadence? What kind of content they're putting out? A lot of different analysis you can do here, but this is good, cool starting points where we can understand what's successful and what's not. I believe this is the last one here, but this is looking at, again, those lapsed players and potential players. So another cool analysis we could do with our game, if we do a survey around it, is looking into what percentage is our current players out of the player base. 13% here we can see, ones that have played the last 3 months or even 4 to 6 months. This blue here is 11%, those are lapsed players, quit playing our game. We have this purplish here, and we have AAA, aware prospects, and not aware prospects. So aware prospects meaning people that know the game, and they seem to be a good match for them, versus ones that aren't aware but could be a good match as well. And then the rest gray here is the people that are not prospects. Maybe aware, maybe not, but they do not fit our criteria and probably are not interested in our game. So how do we do this? Is one way is to start broadening and changing our definitions to maybe we've already hit our core group. We're trying to look at these new prospects. Maybe we're expanding our definitions a little bit to other patterns that we learned. For example, we learned that maybe there's a little bit of PvE co-op that seems to be resonating well. Human Falls Flat, these types of games. Maybe we found a lot of FPS or open world survival craft games in there. So now we can broaden our definition of what these prospects could be, and adding things like motivations as well. So some of the key things that we learned before, exploring worlds or immersion. If we add in these different criteria, these could be another potential group of prospects as well. So I think this is pretty interesting as well, that there's 15% of these potential that never played our game, but they seem to be a good fit based on criteria. We could go to the next step into figuring out how do we target them in terms of marketing, in terms of advertisement, so that they're aware and they start becoming interested. And we also know maybe groups that aren't interesting as well that we need to avoid at this point. So again, it's all about zooming in on the right target audience. All right, cool. So hopefully with this talk, we've gone over a couple of key questions and answers for these three different phases here. Again, greenlighting, to go to market, to post launch. Covered a ton of different content here, but there's obviously so much more we could cover. We would love to talk more, show you more, answer any questions you have, any other thoughts or techniques that you've learned along the way. This is, for us, is always an open conversation, learning more from this. So thank you again for your time, and feel free to reach out to us. Here's my email, tyler.long@newzoo.com, and here is a QR code for my LinkedIn as well. And I want to thank everyone.
Hey, everybody.